All right, welcome to the 416, the interview series, and today we're sitting down with our friend Nathan Franson, and Cindy is behind the camera, and we're glad that you tuned in with us. Nathan, take a minute and just tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit about your family and where we are.
Sure. I'm Nathan Franson. I'm the preacher here at the Mariposa Avenue Church of Christ in Citrus Heights, California. We've been here for probably about 8 years now, going in 8 years.
Wow.
And my wife, Katie, and my son, Micah, who's now 14 years old. He was really young when we moved here, but it's a great congregation, a lot of really good people.
And I know that Katie, grew up near here, so she has a relationship with a lot of folks here too. So
she did. She grew up in Sacramento, and so it's not right in this area, but it's not too far away.
Yeah.
So. And
I always, in my mind, for some reason, I always think Sacramento, but we're outside of there. So let's talk about, and we'll get into the congregation, the works here in just a moment. Let's talk about our time at Memphis.
Sure.
Because that's where we met.
We can do that, yeah. A lot of stories.
Started in 2007. Well, we'll keep the stories to a minimum, I think. So we started, obviously, in 2007, graduated in 2009.
Yes.
And sat next to each other for 2 years. And I teased about that Sunday morning, and I apologize now to you directly. Not for the 2 years, but for the comment in class. But tell us a little bit about your experience going to Memphis, what that meant to you, and some highlights.
Okay, so Memphis was never a first choice for me to go to preaching school. I'd been working in Southern California for a lot of years, in a different line of work, and but I had a friend of mine that attended Memphis, a good friend of mine, Philip Van Winkle, and so he went first.
Yeah.
And then he was trying to encourage me to go. We got to know like Keith Mosier and who else was out here? Curtis Cates was out here. I think Barry Grider was out here. They all did gospel meetings in Southern California, so we got to know them before going to Memphis.
Right.
And of course, they were really pushing to that I should go. But at that point, I thought, there's no way I want to go to preaching school. I'd never thought about it. And it was actually I used to work in the film industry, and I was working on a production called The Passion of the Christ. And, and I was behind the scenes one day and just listening to people talk about the whole incident with the crucifixion. And of course, these were people that never, they were not Bible savvy. I don't even know if they picked up a Bible. I don't know.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden they became the experts in the crucifixion, and just how wrong they were. It really kind of stifled me, because I thought, I understood that they weren't Christians, but I always thought, if people had no other knowledge of the Bible, at least that was the one fundamental thing that I would think everybody knows about. And they didn't. And that really, really kind of surprised me. And it was kind of an eye-opener. And I thought, people really just don't know. And so a short time later, I just asked Katie. I said, I just woke up one day and said, Katie, what do you think about me going to Memphis School of Preaching? And I thought she was just going to be against it. Why in the world? You've never talked about it. But she was very supportive, and I really am thankful for that she was behind me on that. And so that's really kind of how the decision was made to go, is realizing just how much people don't know, and there are a lot more important things than what I was doing. To be doing with my time, and decided to go out there. When I first got out there, it was really, it was nothing like I thought it would be, but for all the right reasons. I thought I knew a lot about the Bible, I thought. Then you get there, and we're so saturated with it, like every single day, literally, with all the homework all the hours that we have assigned, and but it was like the greatest experience for me, because I had never been a part of something like that, and looking at it from so many different perspectives, with going through each book.
Right, and the different instructors too, and their approach to those, because they all come from different experiences too, and different preaching opportunities that they've had, and they lend that information to you as well, to be able to glean from their experiences, and I think that was certainly beneficial. I was just glad that when I got to school, I wasn't the only older guy that was there.
Yeah,
so
it was kind of nice that some more. I thought everyone was going to be younger than
Same.
I was. So.
Yeah. So, and then right on the front row, here, me, you, and Larry sitting right next to each other. We're all about the same age, so I won't tell them how old we are, but the gray hair gives it away.
No, that really helped me too. You guys helped me through a lot with, just having you guys there, being my age, so I didn't have to.
Yeah, I think that made a difference for us. I think our class overall was a good class. We were all pretty close too, and so. And of course, we're still obviously texting all the time. So, when you think about what would you say? All right, not just the experience of in class, but your overall takeaway from school. Like, what was, not just the education. Right. Obviously, we talk about the education. That's I think one of the greatest educations a person can get is going through and studying the Bible every day. That's just amazing. But what was your takeaway and experience as a whole? Once you gain that knowledge and we start to leave school, what was your takeaway from it?
Well, I'll tell you some of the things that I didn't expect is they kept saying that you'd make friends for life, and that your classmates would be people that you relied on, and I thought, they just say that. But of course, we're together, and literally, like at Memphis at least, we had the student housing, and so we were always together and doing things together, and it was really like a little community for us. And so, getting out of school, the one thing I did not expect is that you really do make friends for life. I mean, these are the guys that you rely on, and they're friends. They're the type of friends I never had before, and because I had friends. I had Christian friends, but I didn't have them that close, and didn't feel like I could talk to them about some things like I did, with you or Larry or even Scott or Andrew, whatever. And so that was one thing that I really appreciated coming out of there, is that I had new allies, for lack of it, and friendships and, and things like that we could talk to each other. And then also you learn to deal with personalities. I dealt with a lot of personalities because of the work that I did before that, but you really, you learn how to just kind of deal with those personalities, because being a preacher, you're going to be around them all the time. Right. And even though we were all students, they were still from all over, and in different ages and backgrounds, and the whole dynamic was very similar, I think, to what you would find in a congregation. There are things obviously school couldn't teach you that you learn later. And
I think that makes a big difference when you get out, and there are things that from the classroom you don't expect to translate directly into local work, but it does, so often. And so I appreciate you bringing that out. That's good. Let's talk about the work at Mariposa and some things maybe to highlight. Tell us a little bit about the history here of the congregation, but also, like what are the things, what's the focus, especially right now in the congregation? Okay.
Yeah, we really got to love this congregation. It never was one that we never expected to be here. We never expected to be back in California, honestly, after we left school, but it just, through a certain set of circumstances, we ended up back here. And people think that it's because Katie's family was back here, but we, what they don't realize is, we were in Florida for 8 years. We had no family, and so we were way across the United States, and it never bothered us with that, because we would always, to us it was just going where the work is. That's where we were needed, and that's where we could do something. And so when California came up, and especially up here, when it opened up and kind of fell into our lap, really, we just. We jumped at it and thought, okay, this is, hopefully we'll, and got to love the people. And, Mariposa's got a lot of really good people. At the time, we had 3 elders, and 2 of them have left since then, and a new elder has stepped in. And so it was, when we were happy with the programs and how involved people were. They were always willing to help. I don't think there's ever been in 8 years a time where we were short on help, or that no one wanted to do something. Right. People, they might not realize what they can do until you talk to them about what they can do, but they didn't reject it. They would always at least try it and see if they could do it. And that was one thing that really was a draw for us. That's
great. And I think just us being here, with you this past Lord's Day, it was it's always interesting to come and visit new congregations, you know, and we're getting to do that a lot right now, but and we're blessed by that. But we really, you know, there's so many folks here so friendly, wanting to know, you know, about the work that we're doing, and they're interested in it because they're interested in the kingdom. Right. And I've experienced that, and I think Cindy would attest to that too, going to a ladies' class even today, and talking with them. You know, when I think about the work here in, you know, the northern part of California, but thinking about, is there something that's a struggle here maybe that you didn't experience necessarily in Florida?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the biggest struggle is you know, getting men to step in. I would love more elders. Sure. Of course, anywhere would probably, but it's, you know, but to get men, good men, and we have good men here that, and, you know, and sometimes they don't realize how good they really are and how effective they really can be, or how important how much they're needed. And so I would love to be able to just say something or say the right thing to just kind of light the fire and get them to understand how good they really are. Right. And because we've got some faithful brethren here, and I think it really would elevate, you know, the leadership. I mean, it's tough on a leadership. Sure, it is. When there's only 2 and even 3, you know, you're really kind of stretched thin sometimes, depending on how big the congregation is, and so those, you know, the elders learn to rely on each other. And I know there's a learning curve with the eldership, but that's probably the big one. And it's just everything else. I mean, it was, you know, we lived in California, so it wasn't like we were intimidated by it. That, right? Yeah. What's something that you would want? Maybe this tackles the elephant in the room, so to speak. That you know, most everybody wants to know or teases about, you know, you being in California, you being out here on the left coast, you know, those kind of things. And so, you know, what would you want people to know about the brethren and the congregation out here, and I would say the congregations in California, the ones that we've, you know, met so far and have heard about, you know, good, faithful brethren. Right. So what would you say to folks, you know, kind of asking you about the? I would say just, you know, come and see. Come and see. There you go. And I like it. There are some great Christians that are out here, some solid congregations. And of course, you don't hear that. Right. You hear about certain areas and they sort of attribute everything. But I would just say be really careful with judging the church by the politics. Yeah. And because it is, you know, you've been out here now, you know, we always appreciate people coming. You know, we've lived on both sides of it. You know, we lived here for a long time. We lived in the South for a number of years. And so we saw both sides of what that is. And so we understand it. And, you know, while it used to really frustrate me because I just thought it's, Katie came up with the perfect term, and, you know, she said it's just ignorance, and it's just, and it's not to be mean like that. It's just people, if you haven't been here, you don't know. But there are some really terrific congregations here, and some brother, and you find each other. Right. You know, we work together at this congregation, and everybody really bonds because we know we're all in it for the same reason. And then you find other congregations and preachers, and they're doing the same thing. And sometimes and we're in a really conservative part of the state. We really have that advantage. Some of them are not, but they're still doing such a great work where they are, and reaching out and doing as much as they possibly can. And so, I mean, the work's needed everywhere. The work was needed in Corinth. It was needed in Nineveh. It was needed, you know, you think this is where we are today. There are places that probably people would rather be than other places. Sure. But it never scared me. You know, I always think I like being somewhere that hopefully we can make a difference, or, you know, hopefully that we can spread the gospel somehow, in some way. And I want to take just a second too. We interviewed you already for the highlights for Scattered Abroad Network, and so go check that out. But also, I want to give you an opportunity, because part of the work that you do too, your past, coming out of Mormonism and stuff like that. I know that you've done a lot. You've written a book, Breaking the Chains, and also, you know, doing seminars to help people who either come in contact with LDS, you know, and Mormons. You know, how do you
how do you talk to them? How do you have a conversation with those who are knocking on your door? How do you prepare yourself for that? So I know, just to give you a moment to talk about some of that work that you're doing as well,
okay.
So the brethren are aware of that. That's a great resource for the brotherhood, and so we want to definitely highlight that as well in here.
Okay, so with the seminars especially, what to know in talking to a Mormon, and then I've got a follow-up seminar to that with Be Transformed, which takes it beyond just the Mormon scope of that. People ask, okay, what happened after I left Mormonism?
Yeah.
They want to know. And so Be Transformed sort of takes it to the next level. And beyond that, that it wasn't just about knowing what was wrong, you got to know what is right.
Yeah.
And that is what Be Transformed really sort of focuses on, is that transformation that we need to make. And so, it's not one that's I've normally tied to my work here. It's kind of in addition to what this is, although I've incorporated it sometimes in small subtle ways, but it's but we do have LDS individuals or former Mormons or people that deal with family members or friends, and so it's nice to be able to help them in a way that maybe not many others can, or they just I know what to look for,
and certainly obviously we're not far from Utah and Salt Lake City, and I know even when we were visiting Idaho, there's a lot of Mormons in that area.
There's a lot in California.
And a lot in California too. So there's certainly in the West, there's probably a larger population of Mormons. So I'm sure that's a benefit. But I know it's a benefit to any in the brotherhood to be ready and be prepared to be able to have that conversation. And knowing that background kind of gives us a little bit of an edge, if you will, gives us some confidence going in to talk to someone who maybe we've not dealt much with Mormonism, and so just being prepared for that. But I do appreciate that.
One of the things I really love, and I think we were talking about this before, that it's not just, I see a lot of Mormons obviously because of talking to them a lot, but in different congregations you have people coming out of a lot of different religions. We have some that came out of Catholicism here and denominationalism, and really the story, it's not the same background per se, but you feel a lot of the same emotions and go through the same things. And so, and that happens everywhere. So.
Yeah. Well, check out the book, Breaking the Chains, because that's a good one. And you want to get a hold of it. It'll help you with that. But also, if you're interested, we'll have all the links below to Nathan, to the work, the Mormon Study, the website, and all of that as well. I think Cindy behind the camera has a question for Nathan.
So, as a preacher's wife, I know I go through hardships, which everybody does, but preacher's wives, we have it a little bit different. And you and Katie have been doing this since 2009. And so in these years, when you have had, because we're all about encouraging, edifying, so when you've seen her go through a hardship, or your family in general, what is something that is tried and true that helped y'all get through something hard, especially Katie? And I know you don't want to speak for her, but like something maybe that even you do, or that someone has done for your family that helped you through a hard time. Okay,
that's good. You obviously have the members that you can reach out to, and they're a great encouragement. When you can find those members that they try to understand, but honestly, the best therapy for stuff like that, for lack of a better term, is people like you. Because I know I've called Wayne, and Katie has called you, and it's just because. And the reason why I say that is, I don't think there's anyone that knows what a preacher's wife goes through except another preacher's wife. Sure. And there's and maybe the preacher, but even the preacher doesn't know all the emotions of of what his wife goes through, because you hear things and you deal with things that are very peculiar to you that other women just don't deal with, and that's not to call them short. It's just they don't do it, but then there's no one that knows what a preacher goes through, the emotions that he goes through, except another preacher. And so and that's what I was saying, when you make those friends for life in school, and I know not every preacher goes through school like that, and they do a great job nonetheless. You don't need to go through school to be a great preacher. Sure. But it really helps when you have those friends that you trust, that you've gone through it, and you've gone through all the emotions together, and you all go through the same thing, and not all the same circumstances, but but you can lean on each other because you do understand the hardships, and that really makes a world of difference that you can, that you have people like that. And it makes me wonder about the apostles, when they went through all of the hardships that they went through.
Right.
They leaned on each other. That's who they had.
Yeah.
And it was, and you really start to appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think when we can help each other out like that, that just strengthens personally, and then as we are strengthened, we can go out and keep doing the work.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, you think about, that idea of encouragement and strengthening. It takes, everybody in the kingdom doing their part, and so. And brethren who have gone through something, or should be or supposed to be there, according to 2 Corinthians 1:3,
right,
to be able to comfort others, who've gone through those difficult times too. And so we certainly try to do that as preachers and preachers' wives, and but also as members of the body. That's what we've been called to do, to help one another in the kingdom. And so we're thankful, Nathan, for sitting down with us. Thank you for watching along with us and keeping up with us. We'll have all the links down in the show notes and description below, and we'll see you further down the road.